I still remember the moment Marcus dropped the bombshell that turned my world upside down. I was sitting across from him in his sleek, modern office at Sterling Ventures, a place I'd called my professional home for 19 years. He was staring at his phone, scrolling through messages as if I wasn't even there, when he said, "Eleanor, after 19 years, we're streamlining leadership. Clear out your office by the end of the day." His words hit me like a freight train, but he didn't even look up to see the impact. The office I'd worked in for nearly 2 decades, where I'd made decisions that saved the company millions, suddenly felt like a hollow shell. I'd given Sterling Ventures in Chicago everything I had, and now, during a lunch hour meeting, it was all being stripped away. "I understand," I said, my voice steady even though I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath me. "Thank you for the chance to serve Sterling Ventures all these years." Marcus finally glanced up, and I could tell he was caught off guard by my composure. I think he'd expected me to break down, maybe cause a scene, something that would justify having security escort me out. But my calm response seemed to both ease and frustrate him. "HR will handle your exit paperwork," he said, already turning back to his laptop. "Sophie will take care of your final paycheck and severance package." I nodded, smoothed my jacket, and walked out. The glass door closed behind me with a quiet thud, a sound that felt more final than any dramatic slam. My name is Eleanor Hayes. At 58 years old, I'd poured 19 years of my life into Sterling Ventures, building their regulatory compliance framework from the ground up. I'm the one who designed the custom reporting system that kept us in good standing with the Securities and Exchange Commission through 15 straight audits. My work wasn't the kind that got applause at company parties. It was detailed, critical, and, until that day, appreciated. As I walked back to my office, passing colleagues who had no clue what had just happened, my mind drifted to the SEC audit scheduled for the following Wednesday. For 5 months, I'd been preparing, compiling documents, running complex algorithms to generate compliance reports, organizing data to prove we were following federal rules. Now, I had until 5:00 p.m. to pack up and leave. I reached my office, shut the door, and leaned against it for a moment to steady myself. On my desk were the preliminary audit materials, stacks of annotated reports that only I truly understood. My computer held the only complete blueprint of our reporting system. My password-protected drives stored the verification codes needed to certify our final submission. I glanced at my calendar, where the SEC audit was marked in bold red, just 5 business days away. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. A timer had started ticking in my head, and Marcus had just severed the only wire that could stop it. I started at Sterling Ventures back in 2004, when it was a mid-sized investment firm with big dreams. I'd spent the previous 10 years developing regulatory systems for banks, and Sterling needed someone to build a strong compliance structure to support their growth. During my interview, the founder, Arthur Sterling, had looked me in the eye and said, "We need someone who can see where the industry is headed, Eleanor. Someone who can create a system that grows with us." Arthur was a forward thinker who knew compliance wasn't just a legal requirement, it was a strategic edge. Under his guidance, I built a proprietary reporting system that predicted regulatory changes years in advance. When the 2008 financial crisis hit and new rules came flooding in, Sterling Ventures was ready while others floundered. "That's why I hired you, Eleanor," Arthur had said, giving me a hearty pat on the back after we passed our first post-crisis audit with flying colors. "You think 3 steps ahead." For years, I worked 60-hour weeks, constantly improving the system. I trained staff, documented procedures, and personally handled the critical verification steps that required my expertise. When Arthur retired 5 years ago, handing the reins to his son-in-law, Marcus Langley, I hoped my contributions would still be valued. But Marcus was different. He saw compliance as an expense, not a safeguard. During quarterly meetings, he'd check his watch while I presented system updates. In budget talks, he'd question every dollar allocated to my department. Over time, my team shrank from 12 experts to just 4. With most of the knowledge concentrated in me out of necessity. "We need to operate lean," Marcus would say. "The market rewards efficiency." What he didn't grasp was that my department's efficiency came from expertise, not headcount. I'd designed the system to need minimal staff, but those who ran it required deep knowledge that took years to develop. Just last month, as we prepared for the upcoming SEC audit, I'd requested a meeting with Marcus to discuss succession planning. At 58, I wasn't planning to retire anytime soon, but I wanted to ensure continuity. We need a knowledge transfer process, I'd told him. The reporting system relies on specific expertise that mostly lives with me right now. Marcus had nodded, jotted a note, and said he'd follow up. That follow-up, it turns out, was my dismissal. As I started packing my personal items, I glanced at the photos on my desk: my husband, David, our son, Nathan, and our Labrador, Cooper. They'd understand. They'd seen Sterling's culture shift over the years through company events that grew flashier but less meaningful. By 3:00 p.m., I'd packed 2 boxes with my belongings. My desk was nearly empty, except for my company laptop and the audit materials. Sophie from HR appeared at my door, her face neutral but her eyes showing unease. "Eleanor, I have your exit paperwork," she said quietly, shutting the door behind her. "I'm so sorry about this." Sophie was 32 and had only been with the company for 4 years. She couldn't fully grasp the weight of what was happening, but I appreciated her kindness. "Thank you, Sophie. These things happen in corporate life," I said, taking the folder she handed me. "The severance package is 6 months, she explained, pointing to the highlighted sections. "Your health insurance will continue during that time. You'll need to sign here to acknowledge receipt." As I reviewed the documents, I noticed a non-disclosure agreement and a non-disparagement clause, standard stuff. But reading closely, I saw they only barred me from sharing company secrets or making public statements that could harm Sterling's reputation. Nothing stopped me from simply stepping back when the inevitable crisis hit. "Everything looks in order," I said, signing where needed. "I do have a question about the audit materials on my desk. Should I leave them here?" Sophie hesitated. "I wasn't given specific instructions about that. I guess you should leave anything related to company business." I nodded thoughtfully. "Of course, though these documents wouldn't make much sense to anyone without the context I've built. They're essentially my working notes. Maybe you could email your team to explain where things stand," she suggested, trying to be helpful. "That's a good idea," I agreed. "I'll do that before I leave." After Sophie left, I sat at my computer for the last time. I drafted an email to my small team, carefully outlining the audit preparation status, about 40% complete, with the most critical parts still needing my verification credentials and expertise. I listed the files they'd need, the remaining steps, and the deadlines for each. I was thorough and professional, as always. But I knew that without my guidance, this information was like handing someone a puzzle with no picture to follow. I sent the email, copying Marcus and the CFO, Daniel Carter, who I assumed would oversee the audit in my absence. Then I gathered my boxes, took one last look at the office that had been my second home for nearly 2 decades, and walked out. As I waited for the elevator, one of my team members, Claire Thompson, rushed up to me, her eyes wide with panic. "Eleanor, is it true? Are you leaving?" she asked, staring at my boxes. "Yes, today's my last day," I confirmed. "The company's consolidating leadership. But the SEC audit is next week," she whispered. "We're nowhere near ready without you." The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, holding my boxes. "I know," I said quietly. "I just sent an email with instructions." "Good luck, Claire." The doors closed on her shocked expression, and I descended to the lobby, wondering how long it would take Marcus to realize the mess he'd created. The next morning, Thursday, I woke up at 6:00 a.m. out of habit. For 19 years, I'd started my day at that hour, checking system alerts and preparing for the day. Today, there were no alerts, no reports, just an empty feeling. I lay in bed next to David, who was still asleep, and stared at the ceiling. The freedom felt more hollow than liberating. I'd always found purpose in solving complex problems, creating order out of regulatory chaos. Now, that purpose was gone, leaving a void I didn't know how to fill. By 7:00 a.m., with David still asleep, I went downstairs, made coffee, and opened my personal laptop. Out of curiosity, I checked my company email, which would stay active for another 24 hours per standard protocol. There were 27 new messages since the previous afternoon. 3 were automated alerts showing that scheduled verification processes had failed. Processes that needed my authentication. 8 were from Claire and other team members, asking increasingly desperate questions about the audit preparation. The rest were from executives, escalating the issue up the chain. The latest email, sent at 6:42 a.m. from Daniel Carter, read, "Eleanor, I understand your departure was sudden, but we urgently need clarification on the audit preparation status. The instructions you provided are insufficient for completion. Please call me at your earliest convenience to discuss transitional support." I closed my email without replying. David appeared in the kitchen doorway, his gray hair tousled from sleep. "Checking up on them already?" he asked with a knowing smile. I shut my laptop. "Just curious." David poured himself coffee and sat across from me. A retired architect, he understood complex systems and the chaos that followed when they were mishandled. "How long do you think it'll take them to realize they're in trouble?" he asked. "By tomorrow afternoon, they'll see the full scope of the problem." I replied. "The system will lock them out of critical functions when verification windows expire." Daniel's sharp enough to understand the implications, even if Marcus isn't. "And what'll you do when they call?" I thought about it carefully. I'm not obligated to provide free consulting after being let go. If they want my help, they'll have to make it worth my while. David nodded. 19 years of loyalty deserved better than a lunch-hour dismissal. By noon, my company phone started ringing. It was Daniel's number, but I let it go to voicemail. 3 more calls came over the next 2 hours, along with texts requesting urgent contact. At 4:00 p.m., I got a call from an unfamiliar number. Curious, I answered. "Eleanor Hayes speaking." "Ms. Hayes, this is Richard Bennett from Falcon Financial," a calm male voice said. "I hope I'm not interrupting, but I heard about your departure from Sterling Ventures. I'd like to discuss potential opportunities with our firm if you're interested." Falcon Financial was Sterling's main competitor in Chicago, a larger, more established firm with a stellar reputation. I'd met Richard at industry events but never had a deep conversation. "That's very timely, Mr. Bennett," I said. "I'd be open to a discussion." "Great. Would tomorrow morning work, say, 9:00 a.m. at our offices?" "Tomorrow at 9 works perfectly," I replied. As I ended the call, David raised an eyebrow. That didn't take long. "The investment community in Chicago is small," I said. "News travels fast." My company phone rang again, Daniel, for the 5th time that day. This time, I answered. "Hello, Daniel." "Eleanor, thank God," he said, relief clear in his voice. "We're having major issues with the audit preparation. The system's rejecting verification codes, and no one can figure out where we stand with the documentation. Can you come in tomorrow to help us sort this out?" "I'm afraid I have a commitment tomorrow morning," I replied evenly. "But I'd be willing to provide consulting assistance at an appropriate rate." There was a pause. "Consulting rate?" "Yes, Daniel. I'm now an independent compliance consultant. My rate is $1,200 per hour, with a minimum engagement of 20 hours. Friday morning, I arrived at Falcon Financial's offices in downtown Chicago 15 minutes early. The reception area was sophisticated, leather chairs, elegant artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city. It gave off the exact vibe a client would want from a firm managing their investments: refined, established, and disciplined. Richard Bennett greeted me personally, shaking my hand with a warm smile. In his early 60s, he had the confident air of someone who'd navigated many market cycles. "Eleanor, thank you for coming on such short notice," he said, leading me to a conference room. "I've admired your compliance work at Sterling for years." The conference room held 3 others: Falcon's chief compliance officer, head of HR, and general counsel. This wasn't just a casual meeting, it was a serious discussion. "We'll be straightforward, Ms. Hayes," Richard began after introductions. "We know Sterling has an SEC audit scheduled for next Wednesday. We also know you built their compliance reporting system and were solely responsible for key verification processes. Their decision to let you go 5 days before a major audit suggests either incredible confidence or incredible recklessness." I kept my composure. "I can't comment on Sterling's internal decisions." "Of course," Richard nodded. What we're interested in is your expertise. Falcon values regulatory excellence, and we've been planning to upgrade our compliance infrastructure. Your availability is an opportunity we'd be foolish to ignore. Their offer was clear, a senior role leading compliance technology, with a significant salary increase over what I'd earned at Sterling, plus a generous benefits package. They wanted me to start immediately as a consultant, transitioning to full-time after 60 days. We understand you may need time to consider, the HR director said, handing me a folder with the formal offer. But we're ready to move quickly if you're interested. I reviewed the documents carefully. The position was ideal, the compensation excellent, and the culture seemed to genuinely value compliance. It also put me in direct competition with Sterling Ventures. I appreciate the offer and would like to review the details more thoroughly, I said. But I'm certainly interested in principle. Richard smiled. Wonderful. Take the weekend to consider. We'd love to have you join us. When I left Falcon's offices, I checked my phone. 7 missed calls from Sterling Ventures, 3 from Daniel, 2 from Marcus, and 2 from unknown extensions within the company. There was also an email from Marcus, subject line, urgent consulting arrangement. I read it while waiting for my car in the parking garage. Eleanor, I understand you've offered consulting services to assist with our upcoming audit. While the rate seems high, we recognize the time sensitivity and are prepared to engage your services immediately. Please call me to discuss details. Just as I finished reading, my phone rang again. Daniel. Eleanor, have you considered our request? He asked, his voice tense. I received Marcus's email acknowledging my consulting offer, I replied calmly. But I should inform you that I just concluded a meeting with Falcon Financial about a permanent position. They've made a very compelling offer. Daniel's sharp intake of breath was audible. Eleanor, please. We're in a critical situation. The system's generating error messages we don't understand. The audit team arrives in 5 days. I'm aware of the timeline, Daniel. I could potentially begin Monday morning at 8:00 a.m. Monday morning, he repeated, clearly calculating the days left. That leaves us just Monday and Tuesday to prepare. Yes, I said simply. That's correct. By Monday morning, the panic at Sterling Ventures was palpable. Over the weekend, I'd received 17 more calls and 15 emails, each more urgent than the last. I'd only responded to confirm I'd arrive at 8:00 a.m. Monday with a signed consulting contract. Walking into the building felt strange. The security guard, Carlos, greeted me with confusion. Ms. Hayes, I thought you left the company. I'm here as a consultant today, Carlos, I explained, showing him the visitor pass Daniel had arranged. Oh, I see. They've been in a frenzy since Thursday. Mr. Carter was here until midnight Saturday. The elevator ride to the 14th floor was quiet. I arrived carrying only my purse and a slim portfolio with the consulting agreement. I wore a new navy suit with faint pinstripes, bought over the weekend for this occasion and my upcoming meeting with Falcon on Wednesday. It felt important to signal that I was no longer an employee but an outside professional. The office was buzzing for 8:00 a.m. As I walked to the conference room where we'd agreed to meet. I saw stressed faces and heard hurried conversations. Claire spotted me and rushed over. Eleanor, thank goodness. It's a complete disaster. Nothing's working properly. Good morning, Claire, I replied with professional distance. I understand there are issues with the audit preparation. Her eyes widened at my tone, but before she could respond, Daniel appeared from the conference room. Eleanor, thank you for coming. Everyone's waiting inside. The conference room held Marcus, Daniel, the entire compliance team, and 2 IT specialists I recognized. Marcus looked worn, his shirt wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. Let's get started, he said without preamble. We have a critical situation with the SEC audit tomorrow. Wednesday, I corrected calmly. The audit is scheduled for Wednesday at 9:00 a.m. Tomorrow is Tuesday. Daniel interjected, we essentially have today and tomorrow to prepare. I placed my portfolio on the table and pulled out the consulting agreement. Before we begin, I'll need this signed and the initial payment processed, 20 hours at $1,200 per hour, for a total of $24,000. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he nodded to Daniel. Who took the agreement? We'll process this immediately, Daniel assured me. In the meantime, can you help us understand what's happening with the system? I turned to the large monitor on the wall, where the reporting system dashboard was displayed, covered in red error messages. What you're seeing is the system protecting itself, I explained. The compliance framework operates on progressive verification. Each module requires authentication at key points to ensure data integrity for SEC purposes. When those verifications aren't completed within scheduled windows, the system locks those modules to prevent inaccurate reporting. And you're the only one with authentication credentials, Marcus stated flatly. That's correct. As we discussed multiple times over the years, the system was designed with segregated authentication to prevent internal manipulation of compliance data. It's actually a selling point with regulators. It shows our commitment to reporting integrity. The room fell silent as the reality sank in. Without my credentials and expertise, the system would stay locked, and the SEC would find Sterling Ventures unable to produce required documentation. What happens if we can't provide these reports to the SEC? Asked a junior team member. Daniel and Marcus exchanged glances. At minimum, substantial fines, Daniel answered. At worst, trading restrictions while we're investigated for compliance failures. I smiled politely. Shall we begin? By Tuesday afternoon, it was clear that even with my help, Sterling Ventures wouldn't be fully prepared for the audit. We'd unlocked the system modules and verified about 60% of the required documentation, but key components were still incomplete. This is normally a 5-week process, I explained to the increasingly tense room. We're trying to compress it into 2 days. Marcus paced behind the conference table, occasionally glancing at his phone. What are our options at this point? You could request a postponement from the SEC. I suggested. Cite the recent organizational changes as the reason. And signal to the regulators that we've disrupted our compliance function right before an audit? Daniel shook his head. That raises more red flags than it solves. Marcus stopped pacing. Eleanor, what would it take to complete everything by tomorrow morning? I considered the question honestly. Working through the night might get us to 80% completion, but the risk management attestations require board member signatures. And 3 modules need full verification cycles that take at least 12 hours to process properly. So it's impossible, Daniel concluded. Not impossible, I corrected, but beyond the scope of our current consulting agreement, which ends at 5:00 p.m. today. Marcus's expression darkened. You're saying you'll leave at 5:00 p.m. regardless of our status? I have a prior commitment tomorrow morning, I replied calmly. A final interview with Falcon Financial. The room went quiet. Everyone understood what that meant. I was not only leaving them unprepared but joining their main competitor. How much? Marcus finally asked. To stay until it's done. Name your price. I closed my laptop and gathered my notes before responding. The remaining work would require approximately 30 additional hours at an emergency rate of $1,800 per hour, given the overnight requirement. That's $54,000, payable immediately. Marcus didn't hesitate. Done. Daniel, process the payment right away. I nodded, reopening my laptop. Then I suggest everyone get comfortable. It's going to be a long night. Wednesday morning arrived with tired faces and empty coffee cups scattered across the conference room. We'd worked through the night, and while we'd made progress, the system was still processing final verifications when the receptionist called to announce the SEC audit team's arrival. They're early, Daniel muttered, checking his watch. It's only 8:30. Stall them, Marcus instructed. Offer coffee, give them the guest Wi-Fi password, whatever it takes. I watched the progress bar on the final verification module, 87% complete. At this rate, we needed another 30 minutes. Should I go welcome them? I asked innocently. As the compliance consultant? Marcus's gaze snapped to me. Absolutely not. I don't want them knowing we had to bring you back as a consultant. I nodded. In that case, you'll need to explain the incomplete modules yourself. The documentation package should include a disclosure about the current status. SEC Regulation 17A4 requires full transparency regarding any compromised compliance processes. Attempting to conceal the system status would be a serious violation. Marcus's face turned red. This is absurd. We paid you $78,000 to fix this situation. You paid me to assist with audit preparation on an emergency basis, I corrected. I've done exactly that. The fact that the system cannot be fully prepared in the time available is a consequence of decisions made before our consulting arrangement began. The verification progress bar reached 91% as voices echoed from the reception area. The SEC team was being escorted to the audit room. "What do we do now?" Daniel asked, desperation in his voice. I picked up my belongings and straightened my suit jacket. "You tell them the truth." 3 weeks later, I sat in Richard Bennett's office at Falcon Financial, reviewing the implementation plan for their new compliance reporting infrastructure. My corner office overlooked the Chicago skyline, and a nameplate on my desk read Eleanor Hayes, Senior Vice President, Compliance Technology. Richard entered with a newspaper, smiling as he placed it on my desk. "Have you seen today's business section?" The headline read, "Sterling Ventures faces regulatory sanctions following failed SEC audit." The article detailed how the firm had been fined $2 million and placed under enhanced supervision after significant compliance reporting deficiencies were found. Trading restrictions had been imposed on certain products until remediation was complete. "Unfortunate," I commented, pushing the paper aside. "Certainly for them," Richard agreed, taking a seat. "Though I hear Marcus Langley is no longer with the company." That was news to me, though not surprising. The board finally recognized his judgment issues after a $2 million fine and trading restrictions, Richard continued. "I believe they had little choice. Word is, Arthur Sterling himself came out of retirement temporarily to stabilize things." I felt a small pang of satisfaction. Arthur had always valued my work and understood its importance. Had he still been in charge, I doubt I would have been let go so abruptly. "How's our new system implementation going?" Richard asked, shifting topics. "On schedule," I replied. "We should have the framework completed in 6 weeks, well before our next audit cycle." "Excellent. The board was very impressed with your presentation last week. They've approved the additional budget you requested for specialized staff." As Richard left, I turned back to my computer, where I was drafting job descriptions for the compliance technology team I'd be building. Unlike at Sterling, this team would have proper redundancies, thorough documentation, and distributed expertise, measures I'd pushed for years but had been denied due to budget cuts. My phone buzzed with a text from David, "Dinner tonight to celebrate 1 month at the new job?" I smiled and replied yes. Life had taken an unexpected turn, but I'd landed on my feet, better than that, actually. My compensation at Falcon was 40% higher than at Sterling, my role was broader, and the culture saw regulatory excellence as a strength. Not a burden. Later that afternoon, I received an email from Arthur Sterling himself. "Eleanor, I hope this finds you well. I've returned temporarily to address the situation at Sterling Ventures, and I wanted to reach out personally. The decisions made regarding your position were short-sighted and have cost the company dearly. While I understand you've moved on to what I hear is an excellent opportunity, I wanted to express my personal regret about how things were handled. Regards, Arthur." I appreciated Arthur's message but didn't feel the need to respond right away. Maybe in time, the sting of dismissal would fade, but for now, I was focused on building something better at Falcon. The past month had taught me a valuable lesson: true worth isn't always recognized until it's gone. Expertise built over decades can't be discarded without consequences. And sometimes, the most powerful response isn't fighting back, it's stepping aside and letting reality deliver its own harsh lessons. As I looked to the future, I knew the best way to answer being undervalued wasn't bitterness but excellence on a new stage where that excellence would be appreciated. And that's exactly what I planned to deliver.